tackle about the biblical foundation of justice. We will discuss about the root of justice in Catholic teaching. If you were a whale, it would be socially acceptable to devour your meat. If you were a grizzly bear, you have no fear or respect to the other animals. If you were a chicken, it is permissible to abandon your chick if they had already matured. However, if humans do this any of these, it considered wrong, unjust, and unfair. So why is that? Why do humans needs and care about justice?
So this is the response of the Bible about justice. The foundation of the root of the justice originate of God's love as a reveal of the scripture and about must understood the context of His love. In the first book of the Bible of Genesis, God's words brings all things into being. And the heaven and earth, light and darkness, water and dry land, plants and living creatures are created by God, living in the world. Within the context of the community, God creates man and woman in God's own image. God claims each creatively acts.
The original unity of the creation is in paradise. A garden of Eden, until the man and woman desire power and knowledge to be like God. Yes, God's representatives, who rules the world by His definition of good and evil. And this identity, the bedrock of the Bible's rules of justice. All humans are equal before God and have the right to be treated with dignity and fairness, no matter who you are.
That would be nice if we did that. However, we know how the world really works.
This desire creates a division that inaugurates the separation between God and humans, which has been named original sin. Sin is overstepping the limits of the human condition by aspiring to divine power. It can take place through action or through complicity. Their desire to be like God suddenly separates them from God. Desire for human autonomy leads to alienation and breakdown of community with nature between man and woman.
So, in the biblical story, it shows how we are constantly redefining good and evil to our own advantages at the expenses to others. Yes, it is called self-preservation. And the weaker someone is, the easier to take advantage of them. So, in this biblical story, we see this happening on personal level, but also in family, in the communities, and the whole civilization that creates injustice, especially towards the vulnerable.
However, it is not the end of God's relationship, nor does it bring death, but God's desire to be in relationship with human beings is repeatedly evident in the way God hears and responds to the cry of those who are oppressed. Out of this whole mess, in Hebrew scripture God extends for love and calls justice, through covenants made with Abraham, Moses and David, among others. So what is covenant? A formal agreement between God and His people, in which God make His promise to His people and usually require certain conduct from them. These covenants require a communal commitment to fidelity to God, adherence to the commandments, and care for marginalized groups. Biblical justice is centered on God and just treatment of the poor. Example of that. God chose a man named Abraham to start a new kind of family. Abraham was to teach his family to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. Doing a righteousness or being a good person. So what does that even mean, being good? The biblical word for righteousness is tzedakah, mean its ethical standard that refers to right relationships between people. It's about treating others as the image of God and the Word. It can refer to attributive justice, means is to treat people equitably. Justice is the Hebrew word mishpat. It means acquitting or punishing every person on the merits of the case, regardless of race or social status. Here, the book of Proverbs 31:8-9, bring about just righteousness, open your mouth for those who can't speak for themselves. For the rights of all who are destitute, speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. The Book of Jeremiah 22:3. Bring about justice and righteousness. Rescue the disadvantaged, and don't tolerate oppression or violence against the immigrant, the orphan, and the widow. So in order to live and foster right relationships with God and neighbor, faithfulness to God and the just treatment to the poor are at the heart of understanding biblical justice. Failure to care for the poor is a failure to be faithful to God. So in other words, to truly know and love God, one must bring justice to life by attending to the needs of the poor and marginalized. Love of God is possible through the love and just treatment of one's neighbor, as revealed by Jesus in his teachings, parables, and miracles. Failure to care for the poor is a failure to be faithful to God. The three characteristics of biblical justice. 1. Biblical justice is often associated with qualities like mercy, steady love, and fidelity, unlike the traditional distinction between obligations in charity and justice in the Bible. 2. Biblical justice is fundamentally making things right, not simply recognizing or defining individual rights. It is concerned with the right relation of human beings to God and to each other and to the earth. 3. Biblical justice is a principle that addresses the most vulnerable groups, such as widows, orphans, the poor, and strangers, through Jesus' mission to marginalized communities. God's nature and action. In the Old Testament, God is seen as the liberator of the oppressed and defender of the poor, demanding faith and justice from people. Covenant. Biblical faith emphasizes fidelity to the covenant, combining obedience to God with reverence and concern for neighbor, exemplified by Israel's terms tzedakah, justice, and mishpat. Prophets. God sends prophets to remind people of his saving acts and summon them to return to him in righteousness, justice, love, and mercy, as proclaimed by Micah. Jesus is God's love incarnate and God's justice enacted in the flesh as the new and everlasting covenant. Our discipleship. The Christian message emphasizes the interconnectedness of our relationship with God and our response to God's love, which is demonstrated through Christ's service. Love of neighbor and justice are intertwined, with love recognizing the dignity and rights of one's neighbor, and justice attaining its fullness through love. Major types of covenants in Scripture. Scripture primarily contains two types of covenants: formal political treaties between rulers and kings, and people of destiny covenants between God and the people. These covenants aim to form faithful, just, and righteous people, mediated by God in the Old Testament. Formal political treaty covenants characteristics include a preamble, an historical prologue, stated obligations, blessings, some stated symbol of the commitment, when broken, must be renewed.
People of Destiny covenants. Characteristics include: they express God's unchangeable choice of an individual who will bear the destiny of the people. This form of covenant cannot be broken. It contains distinctive understandings of law and justice. It reveals a God who wishes people to live in a community combining worship and obedience to God with care for one's neighbor. God remains faithful even when the people break the covenant. The purpose of the covenant is a close relationship with God where conversion and a change of heart are possible.
Overall, the surprisingly message of biblical story, God's response to humanity's legacy of injustice, is to give us a gift: the life of Jesus. He did the righteousness and justice, and yet he died on behalf of the guilty. But then God declared Jesus to be righteous one when he rose from the dead, so now Jesus offers his life to the guilty so that they too can be declared righteous before God, not because of what Jesus did for them. The earliest follower of Jesus experienced this righteousness from God not just as new status, but as a power that their lives and compelled them to act in surprising new ways. If God declared someone righteous when they didn't deserve it, the only reasonable response is to go and seek righteousness and justice for others. This is a radical way of life. And it's not always convenient or easy. It is courageously making other people's problems my problem. This is what Jesus meant by loving your neighbor as yourself. It's about lifetime commitment fueled by the words of the ancient prophet Micah. God has told you, human, what is good and what the Lord requires you of you. It is to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.